Wharfedale's heritage line has been on store shelves now for a few years, and it has proven to be a very popular series of speakers and has inspired quite a few other manufacturers to follow that vintage aesthetic as well. But the real question that leads to is, where does Wharfedale go from here? Wharfedale have answered with what they're calling the Super range, and I'd like to talk to you today about the first in that range, that being Wharfedale's Super Dentons. What is it that makes these Dentons so super over the previous models, the original 85th Anniversary Edition Dentons? Well, there's been some pretty big changes in the design that have really helped these speakers earn that super title. The first and most obvious change is the fact that the original two-way design has now been upgraded to a three-way design. Now, the original Denton cabinet was 340 by 240 by 275. And this has been upgraded with the Super to 360 by 246 by 275. This obviously has an impact on the weight of the speaker as well, jumping it from 9 kilograms up to 9.2 kilograms. So it is indeed a bigger speaker. Now, the Super Dentons are 6 ohms nominal, but should you need it, they are also 8 ohms compatible. They also have a recommended power handling of 25 watts up to 120 watts. Now, much like the previous versions of the Dentons, these come in a beautiful walnut veneer, and that is the version that I have here for review. But they also come in the rich mahogany, much like the previous version, and what is new is the new black oak version. Lastly, the other big change from the previous iteration of the Denton is the addition of magnetic grills. These are a big improvement on the previous versions, more push-in, plug-style grills, which were a real nuisance to get on and off. These just pop on and off nice and easy. And the Wharfedale logo is now in the center of the grill as opposed to the left or the right. This is a change I'm a little bit two ways on. It means when you're working out which speaker's left and right, you have to have the grill off, which really isn't that big of a problem given that it's a magnetic grill now. So maybe it's not worth complaining about. Maybe it's not a big deal. All these changes really lead to the question, what does that mean for the sound? It was while listening to Neil Young's Harvest that the first big difference between the 85th Anniversary Dentons and the new Super Dentons really jumped out at me, and that is in the way that the treble is presented. And this really should be the least surprising difference in sound, given that we're moving from a two-way design to a three-way design, but that didn't make it any less shocking. Now, while I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a brighter sound, I don't really think that it is. It is definitely presented with a lot more clarity, a lot more air, and a lot more definition than what you found in the previous iteration of the Dentons. And I think in terms of that sound signature, when you're comparing the Super Dentons to both the previous Dentons and the Lintons, the Super Dentons are definitely the peppiest sounding speaker of the bunch. Now, something I love both about the Dentons and the Lintons is the texture that those speakers bring to their sound. I wouldn't call them a particularly detailed sounding set of speakers in either case, but they're definitely a textured one. And while listening to Ben Harper's Welcome to the Cruel World, you really do get, well, that textured experience is still right there. And if anything, thanks to that additional treble information, you get just that little smidge more. This leads to what I would call a more organic feel to the sound. It's not necessarily what you might call an accurate sound, but it is definitely a very welcoming and comforting sort of sound, especially with those textured vocals popping out just that little bit in front of the mix. Now, along with that increase in treble information, the other thing that surprised me about these speakers was the bass presentation. It was while listening to Seal's self-titled debut album that I kind of realized just how on point the bass was in this room. I can say with confidence that most speakers I've had in this room have been overwhelming in the bass department. I live in a rental home. I can't fill this place out with bass traps. I'm very limited with what I can do. So to have the Dentons only a couple of inches away from the wall, but at the same time have this incredibly natural and cohesive sounding bass, I was genuinely surprised. To the point where I would say that the Super Dentons are the single most cohesive sounding pair of speakers I have had in this room to date. The bass was never boomy, but I could still feel it just that little bit in the floor when it was appropriate. Just overall, I was genuinely shocked and surprised just how well the bass was handled in this space, or how well the speakers, performed in this room. Now, I've left mid-range till last because that's kind of what the heritage line from Wharfedale has been all about since its inception. That's what we all talk about, that warm, cozy feeling that those speakers kind of give way to, and yeah, the Super Dentons are no different. Listening to the Killer's pressure machine, the guitars all have a lovely sense of twang to them. There's a cleanness to the presentation of the mid-range, especially when compared to the previous iteration of the Dentons, and again, that would naturally be due to the fact that they've moved from a two-way to a three-way design. Their presentation in the mid-range is absolutely full without any sort of bloat or haze to the sound at all. It's very matter-of-fact sounding in the best possible way. While listening to Lord Huron's Long Lost, it became apparent to me that the imaging on these speakers isn't exactly its strong point. And I mean that not in a negative sense, but it's in a way where it allows you to sit back and kind of not really concentrate on what you're listening to. You can just kind of let it rush over you and just, kind of absorb it passively. These aren't speakers that shout at you saying, hey, look at this, look at that, isn't this great? Check that out. Nothing's pinpoint accurate in the soundstage in front of you. It's all just kind of like vaguely hinted at, but in a way that allows you to just enjoy the music without having to concentrate on the music. If you're a critical listener, these probably aren't the speakers for you, but if you're someone who just wants to put music on and enjoy it, these are really hard not to recommend for that listening experience. Now, when it comes to amplifier pairings, I'd say 80%, 90% of my listening with the Super Dentons were done with the Leek Stereo 230. And you can take pretty much all of my thoughts about how the speakers sound with that pairing up until now. However, I did also try the Super Dentons out with the Audiolab 6000A Play. And given that these speakers are paired with the Audiolab 6000A in a number of promotional images, I think that's a pretty fair comparison. And while the sound is still very, very good, there are definitely some subtle differences that I think are worth pointing out. I will say the presentation with the 6000A overall is a lot more bulky, and I will say that is a sound that I do very much enjoy. However, I did kind of miss the intricacies and the delicacies of the Leek Stereo 230's presentation when paired. The other main loss was in the mid-range snap. It just sort of evaporated entirely. That twang that was in the Killer's pressure machine, for example, is largely gone when listening to the 6000A. So while I definitely enjoyed my time with the Super Dentons with both of these amplifiers, I definitely preferred the more intricate and deliberate presentation of the Leek Stereo 230 to the Audiolab. That slightly more detailed presentation was just a little bit more to my personal tastes, especially when listening to the likes of Ben Harper and Neil Young. To me, these are an incredibly well-balanced pair of speakers, and if you're anything like me and you're interested in vintage hi-fi aesthetically, you usually are looking for a pair of speakers that are going to allow you to just kind of sit back and enjoy the music without having to think about it. And I think the Super Dentons absolutely tick that box. That is exactly what they are. An incredibly easy listen and an even easier recommendation.